joined by Jonathan Sweeney. Jonathan is one of our outstanding ECI coaches. Prior to joining us, he had an extensive career as the CEO in financial services in a listed firm. Today, he is a non-executive director of several organizations and is involved in the for-profit and the not-for-profit space. Originally trained as a lawyer, and today brings a wealth of really practical experience. We're going to dive into a topic that I know that you and I are both really passionate about. We call it smart and healthy. I think there are lots of different ways to think about this particular idea. I guess originally we borrowed the idea, the original essence of the idea from an author and a writer in the States called Patrick Lencioni. We then adapted it. One of our colleagues, Mike Rollo, did some outstanding work at the University of Sydney and wrote a paper and was awarded a PhD for its application in the infrastructure space. McKinsey's has done work along this line. Even the Institute of Civil Engineers last year wrote a piece in a paper on essentially this topic, which is I think you would agree with me, Jonathan, is a foundational idea about what managers and leaders need to think about in the broadest possible terms to facilitate environments where their teams and organizations can thrive. And we think about that as the intersection of smart factors and healthy factors. And there is an overlap. We draw it and think of it like a Venn, don't we, where they actually cross over. Yeah? So let's unpack this a little bit more and talk about why is it relevant to busy working people and how can executives use this in the way that they think and work with their teams and their organizations. Yeah? Yeah. So when I talk about when we talk about smart, let's talk, what do we mean by smart, Jonathan?
And thanks, Chris, for the very generous introduction as well. And when we think of smart, we think around the processes. So the smart ways of doing things. So you can have stupid ways of doing things. So you can have meetings with no agendas. You can have policies that don't make sense to anyone. You can have outdated legal and risk management structures. So they're what I would be called stupid processes. You can have smart processes that actually enable your business to get things done better, that enable your people to work better, and more importantly, and most importantly, I think, enable you to deliver on your purpose. And so they apply not just for profit, but they also apply for purpose businesses as well.
Right, okay. So you and I both had the opportunity to study at business schools, different schools of course, but you know, when we went through couple of decades ago at least by now. But you know, we were taught about vision and strategy and structure and systems and financial management, capital management. Where does that fit in this model?
So and as you said, Chris, they do overlap. So maybe we could also talk about what we mean by healthy as well, and I think that'll help with the distinction. Okay. With the healthy factors, they're around the behaviours, they're around the vibe, they're around the culture, they're around about how you do things. And if you think about it, you can have great rules, but you also need great behaviours. And both of them are sympathetic and symbiotic to each other. And so when you focus on the healthy side of things, your smart processes need to also be in your mind. So going back into the smart, you need a plan. Yeah. You need a budget. Yeah. You need rules, regulations. You need things on safety. You need to be able to follow the law. These are all really important foundations.
So this is where, you know, well, as you say, budgets, strategy, governance forums like boards, project review.
Agendas of meetings.
Okay, yep, agendas, all that sort of stuff.
So that stuff enables you to do your work.
Okay, so Mike Rollo, he wrote about these being explicit factors. Yeah, does that work for you? Is that the way you would think of it as well?
It took me a while to get my head across it, but what Mike meant by explicit was they're there. Uh-huh. Whereas the implicit factors, which was the other side of the things, they're part of, they're unspoken, they're implicit in what you do.
They're a little bit more transparent, like culture. Yeah. We can't see it, but we all feel it.
Exactly right, and they're implicit in what we do.
Okay.
That's how I got my head around the smart and the healthy.
Okay, good. So I think another important point I think we should make here is that we're not rubbishing the smart factors. We're not saying that they're not important.
No. And I think, again, I come back to that symbiotic relationship where they both help each other. And the key for me is when you're looking at your processes, you've got to be aware of your culture. If you've got a culture in your organisation, and let's be honest, culture wins. If you've got a culture that is very rules-based, people like following rules, they take comfort in a hierarchy, well, guess what? Your processes need to reflect that, right? Yeah. If you've got a much more freewheeling, creative, right-brain culture, then again, your processes need to reflect that. Yeah. So they need to be a yin and a yang. There's a ton of other words we can use, but they need to sit with each other and work with each other.
Yeah, and this is where I think that McKinsey's model back in the 80s, the 7S model, they drew it on purpose where all those lines were connected, but in the center was the culture to help managers recognize that when they change, say, systems, it's going to impact culture, and vice versa, that there's this interdependent, if you will, or codependent relationship that exists across those different factors. Okay, so let's sort of just make sure that we're clear here around the SMART. So we're saying, teams need a vision. They need an idea of where we're heading. We need a strategy or a plan. We need to have budgets. We need some controls. We need some governance. We need all the things, processes, as you say, all that. Okay, so all of those things are absolutely necessary, we're saying. Yes?
Absolutely.
Okay, so then let's flip and dive into the other part of the Venn, if you will, the healthy, as you've done. You've mentioned culture, the vibe. What other things do you think managers, leaders need to really pay attention to that are more healthy, and how do they then work?
Well, you mentioned Lencioni, right? Yeah. And I mean, he's known for his work on teams. And again, teamwork, collegiate, collaborative, cooperative, all those wonderful C words, right? That is very healthy. That is part of the healthy. So whilst the processes enable your business, the behaviours also enable your business. And again, there's this overlap. But you look at behaviours for me, what are the key behaviours? Well, we've talked about culture, but it's what that means. Are people collaborative? Do they support each other? Do they care? Yeah. For me, they're the great things of working with people. And you can turn it to the dark side with those unhealthy, destructive behaviours can get in the way of the best processes.
Yeah. So Margaret Heffernan is a name that some people would know that are watching this, and we talk about periodically. She talks about the importance of building social capital, that glue, that relationship strength across the organization to help it be high functioning. That's essentially
the collaboration,
a significant part of healthy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's we've all been if you're lucky if you haven't, but we've all been in an organisation where that might be a bit off, right? Yeah. And it's uncomfortable. It's not you don't enjoy the vibe, if that's the right word. And you can have world class procedures. Yeah. You can have world class everything, but if you don't have the heart and the soul of the organisation beating the same, it's going to be really difficult.
Yeah, so there's kind of the punchline, isn't it? Which is around, we could have great processes, we could have a great strategy, we could be actually pursuing the right things. Yep. And yet, if we have a lot of conflict, or our teams are disengaged, or we don't trust each other, so we're constantly kind of hedging or protecting or being cautious or whatever that might look like, that the great strategy, the great processes aren't enough to carry the day, right? It's a classic example where we need both together. We need a great strategy and an environment.
And Jim Collins talks about this. He says, get the right people first. He says, get your people first. He said, don't worry about your strategy. Don't worry about your planning. Get the right people there. They'll work it out. And the other thing he's big on is get them all on the bus. Yeah. If they're not on the bus, don't bring them along with you. And so he's, that's Collins's way of saying, let's get these healthy factors right.
Yeah, agreed. Okay. So I mentioned at the opening about it being a Venn and that there's an overlap. Now, I don't know about you, and so please, challenge me on this, but I see stakeholders as a great example of when we think about smart and healthy, they fit in the middle of this. That's an example of where there's a classic overlap, because we need to not only know who our stakeholders are and have a plan and know, okay, Jonathan, you're dealing with so and so, and I'm dealing with such and such, and whatever sort of coordination, the processes around managing our stakeholders. But if our stakeholders don't value us, or we don't have the relationship strength with those stakeholders, well, that no amount of, again, processes and knowing who they are is going to help us. So we need both of them together in equal measure for it to be effective. Is that a fair way to think of it?
Yeah, and that's that symbiosis I'm talking about, is where they both feed on each other, they both help each other. And I do exactly the same with any HR policies, and if you can have a fantastic workplace policies where anti-bullying, anti-discrimination, but if people don't buy into that, or their value set's misaligned with it, again, you don't get that. You don't get them both working together. So there is a lot of overlap with the behaviours enable and the processes enable the outcomes.
Okay, I got it. Okay, so I mentioned that different organisations have done work on this. I mean, let's talk about, is there evidence for this, or is this just a pop idea that we cooked up in the back shed?
Well, you've mentioned the civil engineers. They looked at mega projects, right?
Yeah.
And they sort of said their big takeout. Well, the takeout I got out of what they said was, heroic leadership. Forget about it. It's not going to get you anywhere. You need massive cooperation. You need team building. You need handoffs, and for that you need processes and behaviours working together. Which that sounds like smart and healthy to me, Chris. Right?
Yeah.
So that was very evidence-based. And I know Mike looked at, he talked about it slightly differently, but he looked effectively at SMART. Mark Roller, this is.
Yeah, the explicit and
implicit. And he had a 9-to-4 ratio there, right?
Yeah.
Where he found 13 key factors, and it didn't come as a surprise to me. The 9 factors were all around healthy. Is that right?
Yeah, I know, but it is counterintuitive, because if I go back to our business and school experience, if I go back to what I understand of training and education in engineering, for example, we're not talking about this in the same way, right? We're really over-indexing the smart, and again, we're not saying that it's not necessary. I think the point is it's necessary and insufficient.
Yeah.
We need to build a bigger.
And again, through coaching, and you would have seen this as well, I really wish our tertiary education had modules on communication, had modules on emotional intelligence, because these skills are so important. Yeah, we get into a workplace, and you're right, we can do a net present value, internal rate of whatever it is, we can do that to the side. We can do that with our eyes shut.
Let's not do that now.
Let's not do it now. But we get in there, and guess what we're working with? We're working with people. We're not working with machines, right? And so I think Mike's paper was 9-to-4, basically a 2-to-1 ratio. Yeah. And that was, the light bulb went off and said, and for me, it's very much, well, if there's a 2-to-1 ratio, let's make sure all our meetings, let's make sure when we're examining how to solve problems, we understand that there's a 2-to-1 ratio here between healthy to smart.
Okay, so you've just triggered me, because sometimes when we talk to people about this, they think, oh gosh, I'm so busy already, and now you're saying I've got to do this, and where am I going to find the time? And I don't think we're saying you need more time. I think it's about how you use that time where you spend your time and the nature of the conversations you're having. Yeah. So you can be building, a high trust, high engagement, highly collaborative environment in the same amount of time, in the same sorts of meetings, by just having different styles of conversations, perhaps using different language.
I think that's right, and also again modelling. We're as coaches, we're big on that, modelling that behaviour. Yeah. Don't expect people to change unless you change yourself, right? Unless you model it and they can see what good looks like. Yeah. And I agree. It's also where you spend your time, right? So
where you prioritise it too. If the leader's not prioritising this, well then who is, right?
And if it's not important to the leader, why should it be important to me? Yeah. So I agree. It's a nice prism to look at. If something's going wrong. Well, not just have a look at your processes, have a look at the behaviours and the culture that may actually be just getting, I call it the sand in the machine, right? It just might be a bit of sand in the machine you need to clean out.
I think it's such a simple idea, and if you showed people a model with two interlocking circles, they go, "How sophisticated could that possibly be?" And yet, I reckon we could talk about this literally all day and not run out of ideas and ways to apply it.
I agree.
I mean, I think you can use this to diagnose your environment. You can use it in large-scale mega projects. You can use it in teams. You could use it in one-on-one. There's so many different ways that you could use something like that.
Look, I agree, but most importantly, the big word, I mean, coaching conversations with people. The key is how should they influence each other?
Yeah.
So if we want a wonderful culture, we know what we're driving for, what behaviours we're driving for, what values we want people to sign up for. And again, going back to Jim Collins, if they don't sign up for the values, then you don't want them in your team, right? It's real simple. But then, well, what does that mean for our rules? What does that mean for our regulations? What does it mean for our meetings? What does it mean for all those sort of things? They need to be absolutely sympathetic to each other.
Yeah, okay. Hey, listen, I reckon we could, as I said, riff on this all day. We haven't got all day, unfortunately, but perhaps we come back and do different pieces on this and dive into some aspect of it. If I'm a busy executive, I'm under pressure, I've got a million things to do, et cetera, what are the big sort of takeaways that you think people should walk away from something like
Well,
this?
I touched on, for me, be conscious. If something's not working quite right, then there's a 2 to 1 chance it's going to be around your health.
Yes,
it's going to be around your people. It's going to be around the vibe. It's going to be around how people do things, as in behavioural. So don't just focus on, we need new rules and regulations, we need a new plan. Yeah, you might need that, but maybe have a look at if there's some sand in the machine around behaviours getting in the way. And that to me is a really important take.
Yeah.
The other one is, I think if I had to start, and again I'm borrowing from Jim Collins here, I'm going to start with healthy. Right? So make sure if you're building a business or trying to get a team together, you've got the right enabling behavioural factors. The processes can come later.
Yeah.
And then the third one, and I think this is the most important one, is the flywheel effect you're going to get if your processes and your behaviours support each other and continue to refine each other. You're going to get a better and better and better and better outcome. So this is iterative, Chris. This is not, I've got this, I can set.
No, absolutely. No, it's constantly, it's a really nice way to think of it, that flywheel. It's constantly in motion. And it's really beholden upon the leader to be sort of using this concept as a way to calibrate, like how are we going, and where are we in that wheel, in that cycle. So Jonathan, we have a paper available on the website, so viewers of this can refer to the website, which is eci.net.au, and there is a supporting smart and healthy paper. Of course, if people want to know more and dive into any aspect of this, they can contact us, you, me, again, through the website and really get into some more significant and sophisticated ways to think about smart and healthy.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Chris.
Been fantastic.
Cheers.
Excellent.